Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm very excited to bring you a review for the brand new Masters of the Universe Masterverse New Eternia Skeletor. This figure is a wavemate and counterpart to the New Eternia He-Man that I just reviewed previously. And just like that He-Man, it represents an interesting alternate take on Skeletor based on some really old concept art, but also includes some extra parts to turn him into the more familiar villain that we recognize from the original vintage line. That being said, if you've seen my reviews before, you know how this goes. We're going to take a look at Skeletor's packaging, then we'll open it up. We'll get a good look at the figure itself, we'll check out all of his posability, all his different accessories. I'll be swapping him from his new Eternia form to his classic form. Naturally, I'll be doing some group shots and comparisons today, and then at the end of the video, I'll give my final thoughts. So Skeletor comes in your standard Masterverse packaging. You got the Masterverse name up top. We get this really awesome new Eternia logo right here in this blue and goldish color. You get his name Skeletor, and then we see the figure in the box, and he's already like pre-assembled in his new Eternia form, or what they call Barbarian Skeletor. He's got a helmet on instead of the usual hood, and he's actually got some sort of a goatee growing from his skull-like face, which doesn't make much sense, but okay. He also gets a new mold Havoc Staff. This is actually not the same one that came with the Revelation Skeletor. It's an all-new piece. And he gets this scimitar, which is called the Scimitar of Chaos, which is an all-new weapon that this whole new Eternia thing seems to be focused around. Best way to look at it is like an anti-sword of power. It's a sword of, great destruction. We also get to see some alternate hands and the classic Skeletor head. When we turn it this way, we just get his name and title, Evil Lord of Destruction, so that hasn't changed from the regular one. And then on this side, we get this really cool artwork of this, Barbarian or King Skeletor, whatever you want to call him, where he's, climbing up on this cliff. Looks like there's some sort of fire lava beneath him. He's holding the Scimitar of Chaos. And then in the background, you get the face of the classic Skeletor. And then we bring this to the back, and we get a completely different bit of artwork. Same guy holding his Havoc Staff now, which you can see is quite a bit larger than the regular Havoc Staff. And he's in what appears to be a burning forest. I'm guessing he probably set that forest on fire. And then there's some sort of dragons or worms flying in the background. We get his name and title again, and then we get this long bit of flavor text. And that reads, using his mastery of mystical havoc energy, the madman Skeletor uncovered the violent spell that can forge the Scimitar of Chaos, a weapon that collects souls and grants ultimate power to he who wields it. In an undisciplined hand, however, it will bring about the end of Eternia. To be a master of the universe, he must first master death. But at what cost? So, very intriguing. I love this alternate history they have for New Eternia, where the characters are familiar yet quite different. Like Skeletor, he still craves power, he still wields havoc energy, but he seems to have a whole different end goal, where he wants to forge the scimitar, which is so powerful it can bring about the end of the world. And, he seems to be a little more tempered in his, persona, where he doesn't just recklessly, go after these artifacts. He understands that he needs to prepare himself mentally and physically to wield this thing. So he seems like a much more formidable foe than the Skeletor we're used to, who, in all honesty, is a cackling Saturday morning cartoon villain. This Skeletor seems far more fierce and just far more cunning, which I like. I like my villains to be, an actual threat, not just some joke to be, tossed in a well for all the heroes to laugh at in every episode. I will say one thing that's interesting about this artwork is he has these tons of spikes and stuff all in his forearms. The actual toy doesn't have that. The actual toy has forearm ridges similar to that on the regular Skeletor toy, like the Origins or Vintage one. And the ones we see on that packaging are actually more similar to the Revelation Skeletors, which are multi-plated and a little more complex looking. So I don't know if that was just some sort of artistic license or maybe based on an earlier prototype of this toy. Not entirely sure. Now we get to see our figure out of the box. So you get Skeletor himself hanging out here with his cape and chest armor attached and his helmet installed. You get his classic head right here, the Havoc Staff, the Scimitar of Chaos, and then a closed fist and open hand, reminiscent of that on the vintage toy. So then we get our actual figure here, and he's got all the posability you come to expect. A lot of his parts are the same as the standard Skeletors, specifically the upper legs and upper arms, not including the forearms. The hands are the same though, and chest, all that. So we got this new head here, and it's on a double ball joint, like you'd expect it to be. Then we get this new chest armor, which you can see comes off very easily, and it's just this little bit of over armor with a big old emblem on the front and this big black cape, nice and shiny, and it's got some little like gashes cut in the bottom of it just to make it look very worn. His under chest armor resembles that of the classic Skeletor, and this is actually a different piece than the one that comes with the Revelations figure. While the overall design scheme is the same, the proportions, textures, and all that are actually different. Unlike the Skeletor as well, this one's little chest harness actually comes with a strap or a loop so that you can store his scimitar. Just go ahead and slide it through. You can place it there if you want to, which is a really nice touch and harkens back to the older toys. Now, the old Skeletor didn't actually have that little loop installed, but the way his harness was set up, you could still like slide things back there. So getting back to this cape and outer armor, it's interesting. It's got these little ridges here, which kind of sort of get it to stay in place. They go over these like shoulder tassels, and it's not a firm connection by any means. Like, it'll pop off very easily. It just kind of sort of guides it in place. I mentioned the new forearms, which are reminiscent of the vintage toys with the one little ridge on the top and bottom of the forearm there. As far as the rest of his posability, he's got his universal shoulders, the bicep swivel, your double elbow bend, right there, universal wrists, upper ball jointed torso, full waist swivel, universal hips, thigh swivel, double bend knees, a boot swivel, which is kind of annoyingly loose on this figure, and then your standard ankle rock and rotation. So everything that the other version has and most, Masterverse style figures have. And yeah, he looks pretty good. I also want to point out that obviously the boots are new. These are all new pieces. And the feet are actually new. Unlike the Revelation Skeletor that had 3 claws on his feet, this one has 5. So his feet look a little more humanoid, just with claws on the ends of his toes. Now, of course, we want to check out more of his accessories. So here's that Scimitar of Chaos again. You can go ahead and place it in his hand. Either weapon holding hand will work, but placing this one, give him his Havoc Staff in this hand. Now, it's a little harder to fit because this is a bigger staff than the old toy, so you have to like force it in there, get it past the thumb, and just kind of push it in. There you go. What's funny is even though it's bigger and it's bulkier, it doesn't appear to be as long as the other staff, so it's really hard to get it to actually touch the floor if you just want it to like rest on the ground. You gotta like really push it up into his hand and get past this little ridge here, and then he can like just barely touch the ground with it just to kind of take the weight off and help balance him. But it all does look very cool. He does look like some sort of warlord barbarian or something. Now, I love the new sculpted detail on this Havoc Staff compared to the other one. I am a little confused and disappointed by the fact that it's not painted at all. It's just one solid color. So, like, the ram skull and all that is just purple. It's reminiscent of the old toy, but, I mean, the old toy is an old toy. So, I was expecting a little more detail there. It's also worth pointing out that the claws on his hands and his feet are not painted, which, again, makes him similar to the vintage toy. But on Masterverse, I would expect a little bit more. Oh yeah, I didn't mention this before, but his belt and loincloth area are also all new, with the belt predominantly having what appears to be a wolf sculpted into the front there. So that's very cool, something to just kind of set him apart from the other versions. Alright, so let's look at some alternate hands here. So, I'll pop this off. Pop this guy off. And we can give him the open hand here. And the closed fist right here. So he gets these. And they do look pretty cool. They're not the most useful things because they can't hold anything. But you can use one or both of them to give him some nice dramatic poses. I will say this guy doesn't balance very well. You do have to kind of fiddle with his feet and get him to, you know, line up in a certain way. So yeah, that does look pretty neat, and you can definitely have a Skeletor that's not necessarily holding any items or weapons. You just want him to, you know, be standing there, maybe looking at something or speaking to someone. You know, that always works. And now the last thing we want to check out is his conversion from the new Eternia Skeletor to the classic version. And his is thankfully a bit easier to pull off than the He-Man's. He-Man, you really had to fight with his shoulder pauldrons and run straps through and everything. This guy, far simpler. You simply take this piece off, slide it up over his head, cast it aside, and then you swap out the helmeted head, complete with skeletal goatee for whatever reason, to the hooded head. Alright, that looks pretty cool, right? And for a nice touch, let's go ahead. We're going to take the closed fist off, give him back this weapon-holding hand with the Havoc Staff in it, to make him look like the vintage Skeletor. Now, how cool is that, huh? I think he does come closer than the new Eternia He-Man to looking like the vintage version, instead of, you know, more of a reimagining of it. Because most of the details line up pretty well. It's just down to the finer points that are a bit different, like the designs on his boots and the design on his belt and everything. Well, he really doesn't want to hold that up. Come on, buddy. Work with me here. I say balancing, not the best thing. But yeah, I think it looks great, and definitely looks more like an update to the vintage design than the Revelation version. Which is really weird, because Revelation is supposed to be a sequel to the original He-Man, so you would think they'd get it closer, but they really went out of their way to stylize the characters in that show, and as such, they don't always look the same. Now we get a nice comparison shot with the Revelation Skeletor from the first wave of Masterverse, and you can see these two, they look quite different. You know, at a squint, they are the same character, obviously, but you can see their color palettes are very markedly different. The Revelation Skeletor leaned very heavily into the purple hues of the character, whereas this one, like the vintage toy, leans very heavily into the bluer hues of the character. So there's not really a right or wrong answer, unless you're specifically looking for something like, you know, toy accuracy, something like that. But you can see they really put a spin on the Revelation design. For one, he gets this much more realistically skull-like face, though it's shaped in like a permanent, you know, almost rigor mortis grin, and he loses the red glow in his eyes from the vintage toy and just gets the black eyes, which does make him a little more cartoon accurate. He also gets a cape, which is something that kind of comes and goes on Skeletor's design, depending on the source. Sometimes he has a cape, sometimes he doesn't. The original toy didn't, he didn't have one in the old show, but I also don't mind a cape being there. It doesn't really take away from anything. The only unfortunate thing is that for this guy to have his cape, you have to cover up his classic chest armor with that other chest armor. So, you know, he can't really have both. He's really an either or. The other real difference between these two comes down to Skeletor's physiology. I mentioned how the Revelation version has these kind of plated ridges that just stack against his forearms, whereas this guy goes with the classic, like, two little spikes coming out of the forearms. Then you can see there's a difference in the actual numbers of toes between these guys. Now, the old Skeletor toy, it had boots on with 3 claws sticking out of the boots, and it was never really known if those were actually his claws or just claws on the boots. The Revelation design took those boots very literally and just gave Skeletor 3 toes with a claw on each one. This one goes for a more, I'll say, traditional interpretation of Skeletor's feet, where they're normal 5-toed feet, they just happen to have claws on them. So again, not really a right or wrong answer. You just have 2 different designs that are taking their inspirations from different sources. Generally speaking, this guy leans more heavily into the vintage toy look, whereas this Skeletor leans a little bit more heavily into the TV show look, which does make sense because Revelation is an update to the TV show. Though, you know, he doesn't replicate that perfectly either, so it's all a big toss-up. It's really hard to say which one's better. I think they're just both really good, and I think they're just 2 different takes on the character that excel at doing what they set out to do. And for our final group shot, here's a look at Skeletor's heroic counterpart, the new Eternia or Viking He-Man, and they make a really, really nice pairing. you're kind of taking your classic He-Man and Skeletor and you're dialing up the fantasy to about 11. Whereas the classic He-Man formula, has a very strong Conan the Barbarian vibe, and, kind of minimalist in the design with everybody wearing loincloths and, chest straps, and that's about it. This takes it a little further into your high fantasy direction, something almost a little more medieval than, Conan-like. A little less realistic, I guess. So I think it's a very nice spin on things to take the old aesthetic and then transform it into something that is familiar, but also quite different. Because I do get a bit of a different vibe from these two than I do your standard He-Man designs. And I think it's a good thing. It's a way to keep it, recognizable, but also fresh. So between these two, I'm really looking forward to the other stuff that's going to come out of New Eternia. Especially because one thing I feel is very lacking in nostalgia-driven toy franchises, whether that's this, whether that's like the Transformers, is reinvention and new and creative ideas. Right now, because your Gen Xers and old millennials are at that age to where they have the spending money and they want to relive their childhood a little bit, there's this slavish, callbacks to the retro designs and, everything's the original, it's a faithful update, which is fine. Like, there's definitely a place for that, but I think there's also a place for some other stuff, and that's where I like to see this, where it's something that I and others as older fans can appreciate. I like designs like this more than I do, say, the new Netflix show, which I think really just looks like Fortnite. But at the same time, it is giving us, new forms of characters that we haven't seen before, or at least never gotten a plastic form. I mean, these guys are both based on very, very old concept art. But yeah, I dig this. I like this fresh spin on things, and if these two are anything to go by, I think New Eternia is going to have a lot of wins in its future. And this completes our look at New Eternia Skeletor. Like the He-Man counterpart in this wave, I find this to just really be a breath of fresh air. I think it's a really fun, interesting toy, and I also think it's a great value, just like that He-Man. It almost, really pushes the limits of what you can fit into a core assortment figure without bumping it up to a deluxe, because he comes with quite a bit, and usually soft goods are one of the things that pushes these toys up into that deluxe price range. When you look at the other deluxe figures that have been released in Masterverse so far, all of them, or almost all of them, have had, soft good capes or robes or something. The only one I can think of that doesn't is Faker. Faker doesn't have any of that. And I don't know if Battle Cat counts. He's kind of his own, price point. So yeah, they're really kind of pushing the boundaries here, which I appreciate, obviously, as a consumer. I like feeling like I got a good deal on something. Whereas the She-Ra that's coming up, she's a little more questionable because she doesn't seem much more fleshed out than this guy or the He-Man, but she's being sold as a deluxe. So it's really hard to determine how those choices get made and how much of a value this guy really is compared to others. But I like him, and I'm very happy with him for the price. So if you are looking for a good Skeletor toy, either because you need a vintage one, you don't have Revelation, or you want something new and interesting, and you want a good deal for it, I think that you should definitely pick this guy up. He should be, more widely available here soon. He's starting to show up online, and I'm sure soon enough he'll be showing up on toy shelves. Typically Target's the first place to get these in. So I would keep a lookout for him, and if you pick him up, I think he'll be well worth your money. Of course, that is just my take on the Skeletor, so now I want to know what you all think of him. Do you want to get this guy? Are you interested in the New Eternia concept? Or do you like this guy maybe in spite of the concept because you just think it's a cool design, or you just, are just going to keep him as the vintage version? Or do you not want this? It's just too alien to you, you have too many Skeletors, or you just don't like the way this guy came out? Any and all feedback is always welcome in the comments section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at the brand new Masters of the Universe Masterverse New Eternia Skeletor. And with all that said, I will see you next time.